Three more common types of consumer cars. What is up guys, it's Nick again here on Cars Simplified, where we make cars simple. In our last video, we discussed the four most common types of consumer cars, which are sedans, crossovers, SUVs, and pickup trucks. In this video, we'll be discussing three more common types of consumer cars, which are MPVs, hatchbacks, and AUVs. Now for other viewers in the West, you may not be familiar with the term of AUVs, since AUVs are essentially Asian utility vehicles. So these are just usually seen in Asia. So we will be discussing that in a bit. Now starting off with MPVs, it has started to become more common recently, especially with more family-oriented people on the rise. Essentially, MPVs mean multi-purpose vehicles. And these vehicles are usually like minivans, but essentially like a crossover. So think of a crossover and a minivan combined. So you essentially have a crossover that's like a 7-seater or an 8-seater, essentially a longer design of a crossover. And if you don't know what crossovers are, you can check my previous video on crossovers and other three types of consumer cars. So essentially the MPV is, again, as stated earlier, this longer crossover. And what are examples of this? You have the Mitsubishi Expander, you have the Nissan Levina, you have the Hyundai Stargazer. Essentially, these are all examples of MPVs, and they have this sense of being a family-oriented vehicle. Like I mentioned, these MPVs are based on crossovers. And as we know it, crossovers are essentially unibody. So essentially, all MPVs are unibody. However, there are some exceptions, such as the Toyota Rush, since this has some kind of weird category in which it's technically considered an MPV SUV by Toyota themselves, because essentially they built an MPV on the platform of an SUV, or essentially they built an MPV that's basically body on frame. So this construction made it a very weird category, since technically the Toyota Rush doesn't have a platform that's similar to that of pickup trucks. If you actually think of it, it's actually very compact, but it has its separate frame. So essentially, you're getting an MPV SUV in one. And yes, the Toyota Rush is rear-wheel drive, since SUVs and pickup trucks are rear-wheel drive, body-on-frame types are rear-wheel drive. So yes, this is why the Toyota Rush is considered an MPV SUV. And I can talk more about this on another video, more on the Toyota Rush. So now that we know what MPVs are, we'll be moving on to hatchbacks. So I'm pretty sure everyone knows what the hatchback is. It's essentially a sedan that, instead of having that 3-box layout, you have the third box, the trunk, flat. So basically, it's like a crossover, wherein instead of having 3 boxes, you have 2 boxes, the hood or the engine and the cabin. The trunk is already part of the cabin, that's why you have a flat back. Essentially, why you call it the hatchback, because the back is a hatch. Instead of having a trunk, the back is already a hatch and connected to the cabin. So what are examples of hatchbacks? We have the Ford Fiesta, we have the Civic hatchback, we have the Honda City hatchback, we have the Mirage hatchback. We have a lot of hatchbacks recently, since people want something that's like a crossover but smaller. So essentially a hatchback. So it's like these weird categories keep popping up because of demand, right? So people are like, we want a sedan that's bigger, you have crossovers. We want a crossover that's smaller, hatchbacks. We want a crossover that's longer, MPVs. We want a longer pickup truck, SUVs. So like, these weird categories exist because of demand and because of market, because other brands start to build something unique, hence new categories. Now our last part for this video would be AUVs, or Asian utility vehicles. And again, as I mentioned earlier, for Western viewers out there, you may not be familiar with AUVs. But for Asian viewers, I'm pretty sure that everyone knows what AUVs are. Basically, AUVs are stripped down versions of SUVs. Basically, you know how SUVs are very well built on the pickup truck chassis? So essentially, imagine that you have a pickup truck, but just the chassis of the pickup truck, the frame of a pickup truck, and you want to build something just basic. You just want to build a body, right? That's your AUV. So what are examples of AUVs? L300, Adventure, your old Toyota Innova. The new Toyota Innova is now an MPV. And the newer Toyota Innova, the Zenix, is actually now a crossover. So essentially, the old Innova is an AUV. The big bulky Innova, the reason why those things last, it's because it's an AUV. You have your Crosswind, right? Your Crosswind is an AUV as well. So basically, AUVs are like these kind of budget SUVs that are just built for families to get from point A to point B and carry everything, right? And how did AUVs start? AUVs were essentially created due to the demand of the lower class market, right? Since back then, in the 1980s, the 1990s, the Philippines wasn't as rich as it is today. Most people couldn't afford to import SUVs. Most Asians needed to create their own alternative to these SUVs. And we needed to go off-road. Since a lot of roads back then weren't as good as they are today, right? So you have a lot of unpaved roads, you have mountainous regions. And how could you get a sedan to go in those places? And during those times, you didn't have crossovers. So you only had the option of a pickup truck or an SUV. But with pickup trucks, back in the day, you used to have families of 7, families of 8. How could you fit that much in a pickup truck? That's the reason why the demand in the market created this sort of category in Asia, which are Asian utility vehicles. Other examples is the Tamaraw FX. Everyone in Asia knows what the Tamaraw FX is. Everyone knows what a Fiera is, right? Those are all Asian utility vehicles. The old Toyota Avanza. And a lot of people confuse AUVs with SUVs because they're almost the same category again. And these categories can get very, very confusing, especially when other brands start to change them over time, you know? So essentially, that's the difference between AUVs and SUVs. They're purpose-built for functionality for Asian countries. So that's MPVs, hatchbacks, and AUVs. Like for more.